Hi guys, welcome to Fabulous Nuts ASMR, Soothing Bedtime Stories. My name is Paige, and today we are rereading Twilight Fairy Tales, the lost upload. We had already read these chapters live. I went to upload them and hit that delete. Oh yes, I did do that. So, in order to complete the book and have the book in series, it needs chapter 11, 12, and 13. So if you have heard them before, thank you for watching it again. If this is your first time hearing these, sit back and enjoy the imagery that this author brings into her stories. It's just so vivid. I really have enjoyed reading this story. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 11, The Song of the Bluebird. Roy had progressed so well that he was tucked up in his mother's long rattan lounging chair at the window. He had on a warm eiderdown robe and slippers, and a big pile of pillows propped him to a height from which he could see the nearby flower beds, and beneath the terrace the long strip of lawn. There was not much to see in the flower beds, for they were still covered with brown leaves, brushwood, but the lawn was full of beautiful, tender spring green. "It is really spring at last," he exclaimed with a deep sigh of relief. On the table close at hand was his beloved white azalea and a field glass. He had been using the latter to watch the fat gray juncos who had settled in a flock on the lawn and were industriously picking away for their dinner of soft, damp turf. The sheen of the feathers on their back caught the sunlight every now and then and made them shine like satin, and the constant soft twitter of which they accomplished their work sounded like bubbling water. Every now and then a robin's note called from the trees, and here and there an early butterfly, tempted from its narrow bed by the sunshine, fluttered near the window like a helmless, breeze-blown piece of paper. Roy's mother was tidying the room before going out, and as the nurse had left some days before, Roy was to amuse himself, as he seemed well able to do these days. "Really, my pet," said Mother as she kissed him goodbye, "if your illness has done nothing else for you, it has taught you to be contented. You never, when I leave you alone now, send me away with the words, 'I don't know what to play at,' ringing in my ears. Yes," she added with a smile, "I know what you say has helped you. Weave all the fairy stories you like, as long as you're happy. I don't fear the influence of little people that live with flowers. Chat away to yourself, and if it gets cold," she finished, "ring the bell and have the window shut." Just as she reached the top of the stairs, she heard him call to her. Roy had a trick of doing this. He always remembered what he wanted after his mother had left the room. She returned, however, willingly, and he said, "Mother, there is one thing I wish you would do. Tell John to fill the big pan I used last year for the robins and put it down by the rose arbor where I can watch them take their baths. It would be such fun." Then Mother was allowed to go without recall. A few moments later, John was hobbling over the lawn with a big, deep dish of water, and from that moment Roy's eyes were centered upon it. For some time he knew he must amuse himself alone. Prince Fay had been telling him stories that morning. In fact, he began quite early, long before Mother in the next room was awake, and when Roy's breakfast tray was heard jingling on the stairs, he had withdrawn to the seclusion of his blossom-roofed bower to have his sleep out. There was important business, he announced, that he must talk over with the dream fairies, so Roy must not wake him on any account. Before the bird's bath was put in place, Roy had curiously peeped between the flowers and had seen the fairy fast asleep in a half-open bud, which seemed to tuck him in like a snowy white coverlet. Now Prince Fay could sleep on all he wanted to, for the robins and the blue jays seemed to be having a circus for Roy's edification. He could not tell which family had discovered the bath first, but both parties were loudly insisting on their prior claims. One fat robin was sitting in the middle of the bath, splashing with vigor, while his mates stood by shouting at two jays who sat on the arbor just above, and they were screaming angrily and flashing their glorious blue wings in the sunshine. One presently dropped to the ground, and Roy expected to see him attack the bathers, for both robins were now making the water fly in crystal showers right and left. The blue jay had such a formidable beak and such a definite challenge in his voice that one naturally would think that he, especially were there were two of him, could make robin's feathers fly. To Roy's surprise, his jay-ship hopped nearer and nearer, and then deliberately squatted on the turf under the shower of dewdrops and flapped his wing and tails with evident satisfaction at getting at least a second-hand bath. Perhaps some lazy streak in his nature made him prefer a shower bath to one in which he would have to use his own energies. Anyway, this happy arrangement seemed to please both parties. Blue Jay number 2 followed his companion and humbly accepted the sprinkling cast his way. All at once, however, there was a flash of blue wings and brown, and the quartet had scattered, calling and scolding in different directions. Was it Blue, the big Aragon cat, lurking in the shade of the fir trees, or had some footsteps sounded on the path? No, they had simply been turned out by a new enemy, and there were only the trio of little English sparrows who hopped in and out of the bath and chattered and fluttered and plumed themselves, certain beyond a doubt that the bath was placed there for them, and for them alone. Roy was very wroth. "Miserable, conceited little things," he shouted. "They have spoiled all the fun, and I never meant for them at all." There was nothing handy to throw at them, and he could hardly have reached the arbor if he had been a convenient missile, though to allow them to enjoy their stolen bath in peace was beyond endurance. Raising himself to the window's ledge, he looked below with the hopes that John might be there, and then he noticed Tiny, his beloved black and tan, spread out blissfully asleep on the stone walk, getting nicely baked in the sun. Ever since Roy's quarantine, Tiny had been kept away from him, and all the other members of the family had been hurriedly sent away. The loving little dog had been greatly distressed, and the marks on Roy's door still showed where she had scratched and begged to be let in. Now she would sit hours at a time under the window, with her absurd little tail wagging her whole body with the pure delight of hearing his voice again. Here was the instrument ready to his hand. "Tiny," he called. The little black body sprang to attention as if a current of electricity had passed through its body, and the intelligent little face was all love and worship. "Sick 'em, Tiny, sick 'em," came the command. Of course she would. Why, she was ready to sick anything on earth if it would please her little master, so she rushed off, wildly barking. She had not the slightest idea in her little black head as to what she was to sick, but she charged down the lawn as affording the longest run and the greatest scope for energy. There she beheld a flock of peaceful birds and charged them wildly, for surely they were what Roy meant. Having chased the last departing shadow with ear-splitting bark, she returned in triumph to be applauded. "Little goose," was all her master said, and she settled down, panting and hoping for kinder words of praise. The general confusion had stopped the sparrows' bath, but now they were at it again, reinforced by two more of their numerous family. "Sick on 'em!" shouted Roy again, gesticulating violently in the right direction. Tiny up again, quivering and whining, scanning the garden for something, anything that could possibly be chased. Unfortunately, her eyes fell on Hannibal, the big white rooster, who was majestically and solemnly leading a bevy of hens into the grove beyond the croquet lawn, where he had discovered and uncovered, by the use of his spurs, a delightful scratching ground. This was surely the foe that Roy had desired to put to flight, no doubt. So with a yelp of triumph, Tiny shot away with an energy that sent her flying over the lawn like a streak of black lightning. Great was the havoc she caused. Hannibal fled, squawking, while his wife scattered in every direction, flying over the ground with wings flapping, legs trailing, and necks elongated. John, who had suddenly appeared from somewhere, followed, gesticulating with his broom and calling Tiny a list of uncomplimentary names that the poor little creature did not understand, though the tone of voice made her retire to the shadow of Roy's window, with her poor little body cringing to the earth, and her tail made a well neigh invisible as possible. She looked pleadingly up and spat out two of Hannibal's white tail feathers with a look that said pathetically, "Master, I did try to please you." And Roy had to say, "Poor doggy," in answer to the plea, which was kindly greeted her tail to wagging and brought a look of ecstasy to her intelligent little face. Roy felt himself rather tired, for shouting commands to a wildly excited dog was not the wisest occupation for an invalid. Sinking back into his chair, he let the sense of sweetness and warmth of the air steal over him and spread out his thin little white hands to a warm yellow sunbeam that fell across his lap as he lay and watched some lazy, fleecy, white clouds crept slowly along across the sapphire blue sky. He heard the distant bird call that thrilled him strangely and made his drowsy eyes fly open. Could it be the voice of a bluebird? Someone else had heard it. However far away Prince Fay had traveled with the Dreamland fairies, that sound of all others was the one to bring him back. In a moment he had sprung from the shelter of the white blossom and with an elasticity that Roy did not know he possessed, landed with one bound on the windowsill. His little green-clad figure was quivering with excitement, drawn up to his full height, with his shoulders squared and his cavalier cloak thrown back. He looked every inch a prince, tiny as he was. "Roy, Roy!" he cried, his face alight, his voice brilliant with joy. "They're coming! They're coming!
I heard, and soon you shall hear and see my people, of whom I have talked so often, and for whom I have watched so long." Roy leaned forward, eager to watch with his friend for the coming host, and then, all at once, the flash of light blue wings and rose-tinted breast seemed everywhere. Bluebirds in the fir trees, bluebirds on the rose vines, bluebirds flitting from branch to branch in the great tulip trees, some silent as blue shadows, others winged away with the sun on their brilliant feathers, giving forth a clear, sweet call. And then, close beside him, another call rang out. It was Prince Fay's silver hunting horn, clear and sweet, but so insistent that it seemed to dominate all other sounds. A passing bluebird swerved in its course as if checked and redirected by some unseen hand, and in a moment it was perched on the windowsill. Still, Roy then saw another little figure had sprung from between the outstretched wings. He was about the princess size, but dressed in pale blue velvet, almost the color of the bird he rode. The shoulder cape was lined with the palest rose color, and a cluster of pink pearls held in place the blue feather in his cap. "My dear Fay," he cried, "what a joyful surprise! Where have you been hiding yourself? Your cheery voice and the sound of your silver horn have been sadly missed by your comrades at court and in the field." His friends, answered Roy, could not catch, but as he stood watching the two gorgeous little figures, standing with clasped hand in eager conversation, he noticed the bird that still stood motionless, regarding him with terror in his bright black eyes, and he could note the beating of the frightened heart beneath the rose-flushed feathers on his breast. The fairy visitor must have noticed it too, for he touched the bird with a reassuring hand and looked across at Roy with a smile as Prince Fay waved his hand in adieu. "Goodbye, dear little friend," he cried. "I must away to the forest where the fairies meet tonight, but I shall come again, never fear. And if you remember the road to fairyland and watch well the birds and butterflies and flowers, you're bound to see us often through the spring days and the summer nights. Farewell, farewell." A flash of blue wing, and the two little figures were gone. The flight of the bluebird that had rested in the trees of Roy's garden had flitted off to the silent shade of the forest, and a sense of loneliness crept into the little boy's heart. And laying his head on the windowsill, he sobbed aloud, and faithful Tiny, hearing him, howled in distressed unison from the garden below. "Up too long and tired out, my poor boy," said Mother, entering the room a few minutes later. "See who has come to comfort you." And Roy felt a cold little nose and a warm little tongue against his hand. The next moment, the loving little dog was hugged close in his arms, and he was whispering in her fawn-like ears, "You won't go away and leave me, will you, Tiny? You're the kind of friend to have. I'll never let them take you away from me again." Chapter 12, The Marsh King's Concert. That night, as Roy lay awake in the moonlit room, he heard the frogs peep for the first time, and he knew that spring had really come at last. What a joyous, soothing musical note it is!
that rolling, throbbing, pleading call of the night. Tiny lay sleeping in Roy's arms. Mother had not the heart to separate them that first night of their reunion, and determined that she would dig the dog out of her little nest after Roy was fast asleep. Tiny was so perfectly happy that she slept soundly, and when that was the case, she had not altogether a musical way of breathing. This interrupted Roy's enjoyment of the frog symphony, so he shook her gently once or twice, but at each shake she cuddled down a little closer and tucked her nose more snugly under his arm. What can't be cured must be endured. So he let her snore bass to the frog's high treble, and in time the regular alteration of sounds made him drowsy, and fixing his eyes on a long, pale streak of moonlight, he became conscious of a delicious feeling of rest and peace stealing through every fiber of his body. Were his eyes deceiving him, or was that the queen of his dreamland visit gliding down the path of silver light? Her gown was the softest, flimsy white, and might have been the work of spider weavers. One great white jewel shone like a star in her raven hair, and a girdle of moonstones gleamed softly around her waist. She had really come to him. Prince Fay might have proven faithless and fly away at the first chance to rejoin his comrades of the green world, but his dear fairy of dreams would never desert him. He could see that in her smiling eyes as she came towards him with outstretched arms. Poor little Roy, these days are long and tedious, are they not? She said sympathetically. But it is a lovely balmy night, and I have come to help you make the most of it. Make haste and dress, for we will be off together into the outside moonlit world. Mother would not like it, I'm afraid, said Roy hesitantly. Oh yes, she would, because we're leaving a tired little body safe in bed with Tiny, and will take only Dream Boy away. Roy did not understand that remark, but he felt great confidence in the queenly little figure before him, and also knew that she was a close friend of his mother's, for had he not slept himself in one of those pearly white cradles in her palace before his mother took him away? The moment he put his feet to the floor, he found he was fully dressed, and as soon as he touched the streak of moonlight, he saw that he had shrunk to fairy size, and he had to look up to catch the smile from the fairy face of the beautiful, stately figure at his side. Come, she said, and she took his hand, and together they began to descend a long flight of silvery steps. I did not see these at first, said Roy. I thought it was just a moonbeam. Yes, said the queen with a smile. Your sight was not quite adjusted then to dreamland perspective. It is wonderful how different things look to what they are when one comes to see clearly. Would you like to know where we're going? Yes, said Roy, but added contently and gallantly, I really don't care at all, as long as you're with me. Why, little Roy, you would make quite the courtier, but all the same, I will tell you. You heard the frogs singing. Well, it is their first concert of the year, and my little people are going to the ball out in the Marsh King's palace, and they expect to have quite a happy time of it. I can't dance," said Roy rather defiantly. "Mother doesn't care for me to learn and says that I can get through life without it." "Yes, I know, Roy, and quite right she is. But, you see, you're not a fairy. Fairies have to dance like butterflies or sunbeams or sparkling on the water. To them, it is not something artificially taught them. It is nature. But come, here's our steed, and we must fly far and fast to there on time." As she spoke, she had thrown open a massive silver gate that stood at the foot of the steps, and Roy looked out on a beautiful moonlit country. No horses were in evidence, but he heard a soft flap of wings, and in a moment he saw two velvety white moths alight in front of them. After riding the golden stork and seeing Prince Fay's friend alight from the back of a bluebird, this seemed no extraordinary thing to our little wanderer in fairyland, so Roy mounted almost as quickly as the queen, and they floated away into the moonlight. The air was soft and balmy, and full of that sweet fragrance of moss and fern and growing things that only exhales from the forest at night. Sometimes they passed through dark, shadowy pines, mysterious and solemn in their might and majesty. Sometimes they looked down on silvery, winding rivers and peaceful, sleeping lakes, but everywhere a sweet, soft music seemed to sigh and swell around them. All at once they saw at the end of an avenue of trees an illumination so bright that it made the moonlight pale and ghostly. A nearer view showed it to be a palace, or rather a pavilion, for it was all roof and colonnades, with no obscuring walls to shut in the light. Another moment, and Roy was mounting its steps, with the queen's hand resting lightly on his shoulder. The steps seemed to be of some rare green marble, and the wondrous columns and pillars were of that same, but around them a golden design of fleur-de-lis was most graciously entwined. The balconies and inside staircase were all of gold, and the effect was gorgeous beneath thousands of tiny electric lights. The floor of the pavilion was of clear white crystal, but the whole center of the hall was depressed in the form of a big pool, into which a merry little stream was flowing, crossed at the back, where it entered by several little golden bridges. Over the margins of the pool dropped ferns, and the center moss-covered rocks had been arranged so as to form an orchestra, and there were seated the players and the singers. Amid all the beauty, they were just common, everyday frogs. That could not be said, however, for the Marsh King, for he was the most majestic in size, and his golden eyes were like jewels. He was distinguished from his court, moreover, by his crown, which was a fine gold filigree with some magnificent emeralds gleaming in the delicate setting. His effort to rise and bow gracefully to the Dream Queen were very funny, but she acknowledged him with a graceful wave of her hand and cried merrily, "Don't let my presence disturb you in the least, your majesty. I can stay but a short while, and I will watch my little people enjoy themselves while we listen to your superb band." She turned away. Some signal must have been given, for in a moment the air vibrated with sound, rising and swelling, throbbing, shrilling, and then blending in the most wonderful harmony. Roy was overwhelmed, seated himself on the leaf of a water lily that grew on the border of the great clear pool. He listened and watched, and he found there was soon too much to see. Out of the shadowy night world into the zone of the brilliant light trooped, sailed, or glided the dream fairies. They were all of them airy and graceful. Their clothing was light and filmy as gossamer, and for colors they might have robbed the rainbow. When it seemed out in the night, they all looked white in the moonlight, but as soon as they entered the hall, the beauty and the variety of the colors were seen. For the jewels, they all seemed to prefer diamonds, opal, or moonstones. In fact, Roy could see no others worn, and concluded that it was in honor of the dewy hour or the locality of their place. Their laughter was low and musical, of the same tone as all fairy laughter he had heard, of the same tone as of all fairy laughter he had heard. And when they chatted happily, it was not like human chatter, a wearying, deafening sound, but the soothing like the peal of a faraway bell. Then they danced, and that was dancing indeed. The Queen had said it was nature, and Roy agreed with her. He had sometimes watched the motes in the sunbeam dancing, when a ray of golden light forced its way through a half-closed shutter, and he had often looked out onto the summer sea when it was covered with what a poet once called its merry twinkling smile of ocean. Well, that was how these dream fairies danced over the crystal floor, away into the sweetest scented shadows, and back again. They were kindly little people too, and they did not make Roy feel like a stranger. From one and all smiled at him as they passed. He had no notion of time. He was too absorbed. He was surprised when he became aware of the fact that his beautiful dream queen was smiling down upon him. He had almost forgotten her in his absorption of the scene before him. "Goodbye, Roy," she said. "I must go. My little people have much work to do. It cannot be all play for them any night, and half of them have gone already to drive the nightmares home and lock them up." As she was gliding away, Roy turned to follow, but he could not rise up, and so he called out desperately, "Do stop! How on earth am I to get home without you?" "Oh, that will be all right," she answered with a smile. "Only do not be frightened. I will not let any of the nightmares catch you." Then she passed into the moonlight and disappeared. The music had grown very soft and low. The fairies were dancing slower and slower, and Roy noticed that as they glided into the shadows, they did not return. Soon they were all gone. Not a footfall rang in the crystal floor. He was alone. No, the frogs must be there. Though the music had grown very turning, he saw the musicians were most of them sleeping, and that the old marsh king himself was fast asleep, that his crown had tilted over one eye, and he looked most dissipated. He looked most dissipated and rakish. Then the light began to fade out, and a little frog close to Roy climbed up on his lily pad and nestled up close beside him for company. In the hall it had grown darker and darker, but out beyond the light of dawn was breaking. How close that little frog was cuddling! His cold nose was touching Roy's face, and that sunlight was growing brighter and brighter.
It looked now as if it were coming through the window. Surely that was a window, and what was that sound close beside him? Frogs can't whine. Roy was rubbing his eyes now, and with the dream film cleared away, he saw his own little room with his white bed and the frog. Where was he? Why, he had vanished, and Tiny was pleading for a kiss of recognition. Chapter 13. New princes are introduced. It was a bright, sweet, balmy morning. Roy felt so much better that he longed to get up and dress. But he knew that Mother would not approve of that, as she wished him to progress slowly, that his recovery might be steady, and that no relapse might endanger his little life so precious to her. He did not think, however, that she would mind his taking just one peep into the sun-kissed, dewy garden where spring's green footsteps became more distinct each day. Tiptoeing into Mother's room, he took his field glass from the rattan lounge, and putting on his slippers and eider-down robe, he opened the window softly for a breath of fresh air. It really seemed as if the change from barrenness to verdure had come in the night. What wondrous powers had been at work! The lovely pale greens, reds, and pinks fairly clothed the trees, so long, brown, and naked. A dew mist hung low over the grass. Long rays of golden light shot up from behind the distant city that stood out like a line of gray and purple fortress on the far-off horizon, and the great fiery rim of the sun himself glowed behind the spruce tree with an arbor that made Roy see green discs everywhere he looked after gazing upon the rising. Softly and cheerily, bird notes trilled up to him from the trees and shrubs, while on the lawn crowds of robins hopped with their peculiar little hurrying step, which brings them up short every few minutes, like a mechanical toy gone wrong. I wonder, said Roy to himself, if the touch of the fairy fingers brought those buds out so swiftly. Then, as no answer came from his thoughts, he focused his field glass that he might watch the robins breakfast hunting. There was one big fellow with his head on one side, listening carefully. Could it be that his ears were so fine attuned to sound as to catch the movement of the long body gliding along some hidden passage beneath the turf? Listening changed in a moment to action, an instantaneous peck, and now the big fellow was braced for a tug of war, and the worm that he held was firmly resistant, clinging to its earthly retreat with might and main. Tug, hop, hop, shake, shake. What energy that robin had, and yet the worm held out, forced, falling. The robin next tried strategy and pretended to loosen his hold. In a moment, the unsuspecting earthworm yielded so that he might gather himself together for the final effort and disappear below. But before he knew what had happened, he was sent flying skyward and fell to the grass, only to be caught by a sharp beak and devoured in 2 gulps by his clever antagonist. A fluttering of wings on the window caused Roy to lower his field glass and look nearer at hand. A blue jay with wings outstretched sailed by like a flash, uttering the discordant cry that is
the note of warning to the forest folks. Roy expected to see him fly to the bird bath close to the rustic seats near the fir tree, which was a favorite rendezvous of all of his feathered friends. But the bird made a swift circle and fluttered back to the windowsill as though turned and guided by an unseen hand. Roy's heart beat fast, and a joyous cry almost startled the blue jay into flight again as he saw a tiny blue-clad figure slip from the smooth back of the bird to stand bowing with courtly grace close to his own outstretched hand. Yes, there could be no doubt of it. He was looking into fairyland again. His first thought was to pinch and wink his eyes very fast to see if he was really awake, and a silvery laugh told him that his thoughts had been read by his new fairy friend. For a moment, Roy was abashed and mortified. It was very well for Prince Fay to laugh at him. They were long-time friends, and he too could laugh at the little fairy's expense. But here was a stranger who had not even been introduced, making fun of him at the onset of their acquaintance. An unwanted cloud settled on Roy's face, and he fixed his eyes intently on a distant treetop with the intention of utterly ignoring the little blue figure. A flap of wings, a sharp discordant cry, and the blue jay was away among the fir trees, evidently glad to put some distance between them. Quick remorse followed Roy's momentary irritation. What a pity he had been so ungracious. The fairy had gone, and now once more the golden gates into that wonderful world were closed before him. His eager eyes were strained to penetrate the shade of the fir tree with the hopes that the little blue figure might guide back his unwilling feathered steed. And it never occurred to him to look down at the windowsill where the bird had alighted a moment before. Had he done so, he would have seen a brilliant little figure seated cross-legs close to his listless hand and turning a merry face with very bright eyes up to his own disappointment far away gaze. The little creature was clad in the darkest blue velvet. His girdle and sword hilt were resplendent with sapphires, his fair curls crowned with dark cavalier hat, the white plumes of which gave the only light touch to a richly somber dress. Springing to his feet, he put one spurred foot on Roy's little finger, preparatory to climbing the back of this doubled up hand. The touch brought Roy quickly back from the distance, and with a sigh of delighted relief, he exclaimed, "So you are there still? I thought you had flown away." "My dear boy, I can't fly," was the answer. "Are you rather mixed up in your expressions, I feel? You are rather mixed up in your expressions, I fear. When you travel on a train, do you speak of yourself as steaming? My bird does the flying, and I have sent him away because my business was with you, and the foolish jay was panic-stricken at your size. Besides that, you know the jay is a very inquisitive and very talkative bird, and he might spread the news, which is intended only for your ears." "Well, I am glad you have stayed anyhow," said Roy, unmistakably cordial. "And now, please tell me who you are and what message you bring to me." Very deliberately, the fairy climbed finger after finger until he stood on the very top of Roy's closed fist, and then he swung his hat from his head with the most courtly bow and said, "Prince Featherweight, at your service, chief friend and messenger of Prince Fay, who is now a special inquiry to Her Most Royal Highness the Queen."
"Hooray!" cried Roy, and waved his free hand in triumph. "I am so glad he has not forgotten me. I've missed him so much, and I was almost afraid that I had said goodbye to him forever. But what is the message, and why could he not come himself?"
To answer your last question first, the reason should be plain enough. The chief inquiry of the Fairy Queen cannot go running away to visit little boys, and to satisfy your curiosity will be simple. For this is all Prince Fay said to me: "Go to my dear little Roy and tell him that the fairies are busily at work, and now is the time to watch for them. Take him to see the gathering at Prince Russet's regiment this morning, and before you leave him, promise in my name that he shall see the baby fairies and their flower cradles, and shall be bidden to the wedding of his friends, the Princess Firelight and the White Prince." Roy was too happy to answer this proclamation, delivered with the most ornate style, with every courtly flourish that the graceful little figure could execute. "When may I go with you?" he gasped at last. "Now, if you will, I can take you on my own steed, if you are willing to become fairy-like, or you can run down the stairs and unlock the front door, and I'll meet you out on the lawn." Roy was about to accept the last offer when he thought of his mother. The grass was dewy, the morning air fresh. What would she say to her little invalid slipping out without leave, and in attire consisting of slipper and dressing gown only? For a moment he hesitated. Oh, surely a fairy trip could hurt no one, and yet his little heart said loudly, "Think of mother, what would she wish?" And it was sad, and somewhat choking little voice he answered, "Oh, Prince Featherweight, I am so sorry, but I cannot come. I've been very sick, you know, and mother would not like it, though she has not said I mustn't go. I know she would say if I asked to go. I know she would say it if I asked to go, so I'll have to give it up." "That is a pity," answered the fairy. "I wonder Fay did not think of that. I guess I'll have to ride away and get the aid of another friend of ours, who alone can get us over this difficulty." The clear call of a silvery hunting horn followed these words. There again was a flash of gray and blue, and once more the jay had vanished amid the dark green of the fir tree. But this time he bore on his outstretched wings the graceful, commanding little figure of his princely master. As he saw the gates to fairyland shut before him, he threw aside wrapper and slipper and crept back into bed. Pulling the sheet and blankets, he covered his head that the bitter sob of disappointment might not be heard. But there was one who did hear. Tiny crept out of the basket beneath Roy's bed and sprang lightly into the snowy coverlet. She scratched at top where the opening of a mittens ought to be. Roy's tight grasp of the bedclothes relaxed, and Tiny found a space to poke in an inquiring nose. The opening grew more encouraging, and Tiny's little tan-covered paws enlarged it enough for the loving dog eyes to see tear-stained little face. That was enough. With a look of the humblest repentance for all the sins she might have committed, Tiny began to kiss the wet cheek of her beloved master, taking, as she always seemed to take, all the blame for Roy's unhappiness, and the little black dog was pulled into the nestle of the child's encircling arms, and by, so still were they both that you might have fancied, by the light and regular rise and fall of the coverlet, that they were sound asleep. Had you suggested this to Roy, however, he would have indignantly denied the impeachment. With his chin resting on tiny, soft, silky ears, he lay thinking of the beauty of the garden and of the free, happy birds whose morning songs he could still hear, and above all of the busy fairies whose company he had been bidden to join, and from whom he had turned away. Perhaps his thoughts were growing a little hazy, for as he peeped from his coverlet, he thought he saw a golden stork on the screen wink at him. He looked again, and that extraordinary bird was yawning and stretching his wings, and the next moment he had hopped down and was striding across the floor in a path made by a long pencil of golden sunlight. "Well, well, well," he exclaimed. "Great things, that wireless telegraphy. I was sound asleep after a heavy night's work when click, clack, clack, it woke me up, and the Dream Queen's chief lord in waiting was sending a special call for me to hurry up and take you out to see the fairy gardens at work." It did not take Roy a moment to tumble out of bed, and when he touched the floor, he realized that there was a fairy. And when he touched the floor, he realized that he was of fairy proportions once more, for he could not touch the stork's back, even by standing on tiptoe and stretching up ever so far. In camel fashion, the big bird stooped and let him mount, and then it was that Roy noticed that Tiny, also of fairy size, was at his feet, wagging a very wee stump of a tail and begging with eager eyes to go too. Taking the doggie up quickly, he placed her in front of him on the golden back of the bird, who at the next moment was striding swiftly down the golden path to the window. With an upward spring, it had reached the sill, and then was out in the soft spring air, sailing lightly as a feather down, down, down to the green lawn that spread out like a great velvet carpet below. When their garden steed landed, Roy and Tiny slipped to the ground and found Prince Featherweight at their side. "Go home," he ordered, as the big bird scraped and bowed in a somewhat stiff and stalky fashion. "I can see you're nearly asleep now. It is unusual for the dream fairies to use him, except during the dark hours," he added Roy, "and I believe he had a very busy time last night carrying down some much-wanted dream babies. So we will send him home, and then no one will chance to see the empty place on the Japanese screen." Roy watched the flight of the swift, regular beating wings gleaming like burnished gold in the sun, and he sighed with the sheer pleasure of the beauty of the hour and the scene. Was there ever such a perfect spring morning? "Come, come," cried his new friend. "If you are to see anything, we must hurry up, for it's getting late, and the prince who is in charge today will be off to the forest in half an hour, and he is especially noted for his punctuality." The line now seemed to Roy of such immense proportion that he was not surprised that Prince Featherweight preferred to ride than to journey on foot. A shrill note on his bugle brought a swift sweep of blue wings, and another summons the bird's mate, so that in less time than it takes to tell it, Roy was again mounted, and with Tiny before him, as eager and excited as himself, followed the prince's lead over long stretches of green plain towards what looked like brown hillock in the distance. When their destination was reached, however, he found out that these must be Mother's flower beds, in which she had planted so much care hundreds of little brown bulbs. Papa always laughed at her for her enthusiasm over bulbs. When he came upon her reading Henderson's fall catalogue, he would say, "Oh dear, Mother's got the bulb craze again," and he would groan whenever the question was mentioned and pretend he must hide his checkbook and make all sorts of naughty, teasing remarks. After the planting of the bulbs came the gathering of the piles of dried leaves to cover them, and then, over all, branches of brushwood would keep the leaves from blowing away. On the very top of one of these beds, the blue jay left their riders, and Roy, somewhat out of breath and full of wonder, gazed down slope below him and saw on every side an army of busy workers. They were fairies, sure enough, but not fairies of the velvet cloaks, jeweled swords, and diamond buckle shoes. Every tiny fairy was clad in russet brown, from the little round cap to the neat brown shoes. So like the leaves did they appear, that had they stood perfectly still, their presence would not have been detected. The sound of their merry laughter as they worked seemed as much a part of the sweet spring air as the sound of birds, and the smile on their happy faces, their bright eyes and soft golden brown hair seemed akin to the earthly sunshine. Roy and Tiny were so absorbed by watching these tiny workers that they did not see the princely figure that had approached Prince Featherweight, and it was not till his arm was taken and a friendly shake administered that Roy turned to hear his friend saying, "Let me introduce to you Prince Russet, who is another special friend of our mutual friend, and a very good fellow, I can assure you, though he has such a reputation for hard work." The prince, thus introduced, laughing happily. "My dear Featherweight," he said, "work, when one's whole heart is in the undertaking, and when the work is rightly done, is full of enjoyment. And I'll tell you, we have plenty of frolic and fun where other people seem to think there could only be but toil." Roy, who had clasped the outstretched hand cordially, looked up with admiration at the gallant figure that rose majestically above him. He knew that this princeling was only about the height of Prince Fay, and that when he was out of fairyland he could comfortably set both fairies on the palm of his hand and have room for half a dozen more of the same size. But now he was small enough to see him as his followers did. The prince's dress, though of the same brown tints and shades as those his followers wore, was of velvet, and a soft brown plume weaved in his cap. The jewel that held it in place was an opal, translucent as a dewdrop, and showing all the soft hues of the fading rainbow. Another gem of the same beauty clasped his girdle, and yet another buckle on the cloak that fell gracefully back from his shoulders. Roy, who had a keenly artistic eye, was charmed with the taste and harmony of the coloring. "Come," said the prince, "if you would understand our laborers of this morning, I must show you my people working and learn what they have accomplished." From group to group of busy workers, Roy followed his friends. He saw that with sword and spear they were cutting the dead leaves
and here and there hacking with might and main at some branch of brushwood that seemed to be somehow in the way. But what's it all for? Why must they split the leaves and cut the branches? Because, my dear little boy, something wants to come through to the sunlight, and if you will peep into each hole or opening they have made, you will see a green head peeping out, ever so glad that it can now grow up straight instead of bending over crooked or staying down there doubled up altogether. Drawn into the caverns on the hillside, Roy peered eagerly, and in every one a green head or spear pointed upwards towards the light. Some of them that had been bent and crooked were stretching themselves as a tall man would, who has been stooping in a vault where he was unable to stand upright. "Why," he exclaimed with a gasp after a long pause for thought, "they must be Mother's bulbs." "Yes," said the prince with a laugh, "this is the yellow tulip bed. Your mother did not know how well advanced the spring was, and she has not uncovered them quite early enough. Now, when she sees the green heads showing through, with the slits in the holes we have made, she will come to their rescue and have all the old branches removed." "That is very kind of you, I am sure," said Roy. "I will tell her. I am sure she will be very much obliged." "My little dear boy," said the prince, "if you do, I will tell you just what she will say. 'Why, my darling, you've been dreaming.'" Seeing that Roy looked a little crestfallen, he added, "But I will tell you one of the reasons we take so much trouble with the tulips. They are fairy cradles, and in each a dear little baby sleeps. By and by, the great day will come when they open up, and we shall carry away the new babies to our queen." "Oh!" exclaimed Roy, "will you not let me know? I must be there." "We will ask Prince Fay about it, and as he's already taken your petition to the queen, you'll probably receive an answer telling you the exact day, and then you'll be allowed to see what no little mortal has ever seen." "Oh, you will let me know. I must be there, and I'll let you know the exact day." Okay. So saying, both princes turned and looked up at the house, which loomed above them like a tremendous rocky mountain. A thin column of smoke circled lazily in the air, and soon a shutter was thrown back with a bang. Tiny gave a little bark of recognition. Down towards them floated the golden stork. His eyes were shut, his wings flapping lazily, and as Roy climbed on his back, he heard him mutter in a sleepy tone, "Bother that wireless telegraph. I hear it even in my dreams." Up through the clear air, in over the windowsill, across the room, and then, oh, wretched old stork! How could he drop Roy with such an unceremonious flop onto a tumbling pile of pillows, sheets, and blankets? There he and Tiny sat rubbing their eyes and grumbling when Mother came in with a tray in her hand. "Wake up, my pet," she said. "I have brought you such a nice breakfast, and what do you think? Spring is really here. I've been out in the garden. My bulbs are all showing their little green heads, and I have to clear away the old leaves today." "Why, Mother, that was just the news I had to tell you. The fairies were helping them through this morning. The fairies were helping them through this morning early. I saw them at work. Why, my darling, you've been... I began to think it's always fairyland in your dreams. Roy sighed. Oh, Mother, he said. That's what the prince said you would say. It is no use trying to make grown-ups, even mothers, understand. They cannot. They have lost their second sight that sees into fairyland. That's what Prince Fay told me once. Well, darling, I suppose Prince Fay is right, and it may be because we have too many other nearer and dearer, more important things, such as little boys, for instance, to look and care for. Yes. Okay, that's the end. That'll catch me